This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Valerie Sanderson, and in the early hours of Saturday the 27th of March, these are our main stories. A major report into the role France played in the Rwandan genocide has criticised French failures, saying the country was blind to the preparation of the massacre of 800,000 people. A search and rescue operation has been taking place in southern Egypt, where more than 30 people were killed when two trains collided.
They can't remove the people from underneath the trains. It's a shame. Look at the children. We need a crane. People are dead. We can't even save the ones who are alive.
A $1.6 billion lawsuit has been brought against Fox News by the company it accused on air of interfering with votes cast in last year's US presidential election. Also in this podcast, we're in Tanzania, where the former president, John Magufuli, has been laid to rest in his hometown of Chato, 9 days after the government said he died from heart disease. And later,
you queue first, you smell it when you walk in a bakery, and then you ask the madame behind the counter, I'll have a baguette, s'il vous plaît, and then she gives you a baguette, and what's the first thing you do with it? You get it in your finger, and the first thing you do, you don't even know you're doing it, you give it a squeeze, don't you?
France nominates its beloved baguette for inclusion on UNESCO's Cultural Heritage Register. We begin this podcast in France, where a major report on the country's role at the time of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994 has strongly criticised the failures of the country's establishment. The commission of experts put in place on the orders of President Emmanuel Macron said France bore overwhelming responsibilities in relation to the killing of members of Rwanda's minority Tutsis and moderate Hutus in a frenzy of violence over 100 days. More than 800,000 people were massacred. Lindsay Hilsum was in Kigali for the BBC at the time.
I've seen some of the most terrible things today that I've ever seen. It's been absolutely horrific. The killings, the random killings, the soldiers going around and groups of youths armed with knives. I'm afraid I think that's still going on. So even though it may sound quieter, I have a horrible feeling that in the suburbs of Kigali, that doesn't mean that things are better at all. In fact, it may mean that things are even worse.
That was Rwanda 27 years ago. Our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield told me more about the report.
It's particularly damning in its criticism of President Mitterrand, who was president at the time. Not only does it criticise his assessment of Rwandan politics, which it said was heavily influenced by a kind of blinkered francophone view of the world, where he saw that the Hutus under President Habyarimana were good because supporting French, and the Tutsi rebels were bad because English-speaking, coming from Uganda and representing a kind of Anglo-British interest in the continent. And this sort of vision, this interpretation of events became obsessive, and that the other failing was that he then took over policy. Mitterrand ran policy from the Elysée. It became a really big deal for him, and so all the conventional and regular channels of power and communication, diplomatic, military, intelligence, were taken over by the president, and anyone who suggested other interpretations was simply ignored, and all that created the ground for the genocide. The historians certainly do not accuse the French of genocide or even complicity in genocide, but they do accuse them of a responsibility in ignoring signs which were clearly there about the radical nature of some in that regime.
I mean, President Mitterrand is dead, of course, now, isn't he? I mean, how will this report be viewed by the French authorities in the present, do you think?
Well, I mean, look, it's not a huge surprise. I mean, the French were there. There's been plenty of criticism of the French over the years, and this interpretation that it was Mitterrand dovetailing a personal contact with Habyarimana, a friendship with him, with classic preserving French interests in Africa, and that blinkering him to the reality of what was going on. That's not new. What's new is that it's from historians who are respected, who've consulted acres of documents and archives and so on. This is very, very authoritative and will undoubtedly go down as a sort of definitive text on France's role.
I suppose the question now is, will it heal any historic wounds? Because Rwanda has long accused France of being complicit, isn't it, in what happened back in the 1990s?
Well, indeed, and the relations with Kigali now have not great. They've been certainly up and down. As time goes by and as more sort of self-exploratory analyses like this come out, clearly that will help to build bridges of understanding. And certainly Macron's desire, as with the Algerian war, is to take a hard, dispassionate look at the evidence and to come to conclusions, not to point fingers, not to blame anyone. As you say, Mitterrand's long dead, it really doesn't matter anymore. There are some players still around, but simply to kind of get that kind of appeased, peaceful, shared interpretation of what happened, so that people can start building bridges again.
Hugh Schofield. In Egypt, an operation has been underway to try and free people trapped by a collision between two trains in the southern province of Sohag. More than 30 people are known to have died and scores more were injured when several carriages derailed and overturned. Dozens of ambulances were sent to the scene. This man arrived there shortly after the crash.
We need an official to come and see what has happened. They can't remove the people from underneath the trains. It's a shame. Look at the children. We need a crane, but they said it's an I-40. People are dead. We can't even save the ones who are alive.
From Cairo, our correspondent Sally Nabil told us more.
Apparently, the two trains were on one track, and what official statements say is that a group of unidentified men pulled the emergency brakes on one of the two trains, causing both trains to collide. So the initial assessment is that it is a deliberate act, but the statement didn't elaborate, and we are expecting more details later. But the accident by all means is horrific, and pictures and videos we are getting from the scene are absolutely heartbreaking, and they are very chaotic. People are so angry, they are screaming. We understand there are people still trapped under the wreckage. Medical teams have been flown from Cairo to Sohag, and it is one of Egypt's poorest provinces. It lacks the very basic services. The Prime Minister has already visited the scene, and he visited the wounded in hospitals, so it is a very tragic day for Egyptians.
And these were two passenger trains. Were they packed?
Yes, apparently they were packed, and usually trains heading to the south are used by lower middle class and poor class people, and that collision caused an uproar on social media. Users are saying it is usually the poor who pay the price for chronic problems that never get fixed by the government. And it's worth mentioning that train crashes happen quite often in Egypt. They happen frequently over the past 2 or 3 decades. And ministers and officials keep promising reforms, keep promising directing funds into the transportation system, but none of these promises materialize. Accidents keep happening and many lives are lost.
Sally Nabil. 6 months after the war in the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh broke out, the reverberations are still being felt. Armenia, which lost, has been gripped by political instability and demonstrations, and the country's Prime Minister has announced that fresh elections will be held in June. With the Armenian army forced to pull out of the region, Russia now has some 2,000 peacekeepers on the ground. As our correspondent Jonah Fisher reports, the Kremlin has significantly increased its influence in the region.
We drive towards Armenia's border with Nagorno-Karabakh. With the Armenian army pulling out, it's now 2,000 Russian peacekeepers who act as the guarantor of the enclave's security.
I'm now at what's known as the Lachin corridor. It is perhaps the most crucial point in this new peace agreement. This road, and it's a fabulously winding road that leads down a valley and up the other side. This road is the only link between Armenia, the outside world, and this ethnic Armenian enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, since the war, the Armenians no longer control who and what uses this road. There's a Russian military checkpoint. It's about 500 meters from where I am now. It's up to the Russian military who comes in and out of the enclave. And that basically means that the Russians call the shots round here.
We're denied permission to enter and are told privately that the Russians are now blocking almost all foreigners.
It's a real pain that we have to talk like this rather than in person, Mr. Baglarian.
That evening, we speak to a Nagorno-Karabakh official, Artak Baglarian, on a WhatsApp call.
Has Nagorno-Karabakh become another one of these little states that we see in this part of the world which are occupied by Russia?
No, actually there is no occupation by Russia. There is Russian peacekeeping forces here in Artsakh in order to protect our life and our security.
So you're happy to have Russia there? It's better than having Azerbaijan occupy you?
We are happy to live in our own land and to continue our struggle for our independence.
The war and the deployment of peacekeepers has returned Russia to a pivotal role in the southern Caucasus. And that's not all. Russia analyst Sergei Markov says Armenia's painful experience has delivered a powerful message to other leaders in the post-Soviet space.
Russian influence have been increased after this peace deal, not only inside Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also in other countries as well, because of other countries now has the lesson. If you have American puppet as your leader of your country, you will lose your territory.
The so-called American puppet is Nikol Pashinyan, Armenia's prime minister. He came to power in a popular uprising 3 years ago and has shouldered much of the blame for the loss of Karabakh. There have been several months of demonstrations in Yerevan against Mr. Pashinyan. Critics, such as opposition politician Levon Zurabian, say he should have maintained better relations with Moscow and, given Azerbaijan's alliance with Turkey, made concessions to try to avoid war.
Despite all of these facts, Nikol Pashinyan chose to reject the peace proposals that were negotiated. So that was a huge diplomatic failure that actually brought a catastrophe to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh.
Russia, not Armenia, is now Nagorno-Karabakh's key relationship. Moscow will ultimately have to decide if it wants a long-term military presence protecting the Armenian enclave. If not, Azerbaijan will surely get its way and take control of all of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Jonah Fisher. While the world's coronavirus vaccine drive continues, the political and commercial arguments are also ongoing. France's foreign minister has warned that countries should not use blackmail in order to get their populations vaccinated. Jean-Yves Le Drian also suggested to a radio interviewer that Britain had a problem with delivering second doses of vaccine. From Paris, here's Lucy Williamson.
Jean-Yves Le Drian was quizzed by the presenter as to whether Europe had been scammed by sending vaccines to the UK and not receiving any in return. He said that while the UK took pride in having vaccinated a lot of people with their first jabs, they had a problem delivering the second. We need to build a cooperative relationship with the UK, Mr Le Drian said, so that AstraZeneca fulfills its commitment to the EU, but one can't play with blackmail, having given a lot of first jabs and then run into problems with the second. The EU shouldn't be paying the price for that policy. He said he hoped to come to an agreement, saying it would be staggering to have a vaccine war between the UK and the EU.
Lucy Williamson. Well, let's stay in France, where the baguette has been chosen as the country's candidate for UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage status. It'll join a list including the sauna culture in Finland, a lantern festival in South Korea, and a grass mowing competition in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The baguette, a long loaf of bread, is synonymous with French culture. According to one estimate, some 10 billion baguettes are consumed every year in France. That's around 320 every single second. Julian Marshall has been speaking to the French baker and author Richard Bertinet, who explained that buying a baguette is a cherished ritual.
You go to the bakery in the morning, and what's the first thing you do when you buy your baguette? You queue first, you smell it when you walk in the bakery, and then you point at your baguette, you look at it, and then you ask the madame behind the counter, I'll have a baguette, s'il vous plaît, and then she gives you a baguette. And what's the first thing you do with it when you buy your baguette?
Well, you take it home.
No, before that. You get it in your finger, and the first thing you do, you don't even know you're doing it, you give it a squeeze, don't you?
Uh-huh.
You give it a squeeze.
Yeah.
And then imagine that baguette in your finger, give it a squeeze, and imagine that crack. What's happening in your stomach now? Just above your stomach. You can feel something switched on now. Yeah? And that's switched on there. Now your mouth salivating. I can hear it. And then your brain now is switched on. So now you start to digest already. So that baguette already is doing its work because the crunch is everything. That's what helps you to digest better. Now, if you buy a baguette which is all soft and disgusting from which is not a proper boulangerie, you will never get that. And that's the thing. And then you come out of the bakery, you crack the baguette, the top, the crouton, we call it, and then you start chewing on it. And before you arrive home, half of the baguette is gone already.
Well, I certainly know that experience. But you seem to be suggesting that buying a baguette is as important a part of the ritual as making it or eating it.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. In France, when you grow up, every village we have 2 or 3 bakeries, and you might buy your baguette from one bakery and your croissant from another one, because everyone is specialized on different things. It's a very part of your life every day. When you leave the house in the morning, you ask the other person,